My lords, I'm very much in favour of Amendment 31 to put a different emphasis on it even than has been so far, is because I think that Lord Moylan's amendment is very helpful in making a positive attempt at promoting free speech, and as the amendment says, fostering a culture of free thought and open-mindedness in all decision making, covering the provision of HE and in conducting and managing research activities. And it's that promotion bit that I thought was helpful in terms of shifting a little bit of the emphasis of the discussion about how we should view the bill. I was reading this small, happy, if that's how you say it, pamphlet in preparation for the student union group of debates afterwards. And I find it a really interesting little book. And the foreword by Professor James Tooley, the Vice-Chancellor of University of Buckingham, has also co-published the book. And I should just declare an interest that I am a visiting professor at the University of Buckingham. But the thing that Professor Tooley says is that for many academics, the focus is only on the negative, on the sticks of the law. And Professor Tooley advocates that we focus on the positive, on the carrots of the intellectual and social attraction of academic freedom. And in fact, many people have said that the problem with this bill is that it's not tackling the cultural issues, that it avoids this kind of what's happened to that positive association of universities with academic freedom. One of the contributions earlier asked, why hasn't the 1986 duties worked? I mean, what's the point in bringing in another bill? Well, I think that quite a lot has changed since those duties were brought in the sphere of academic freedom, which is why I believe that we need to both pass a version of this bill, amended no doubt, but also not use it as a silver bullet that avoids tackling the cultural issues. And so anything that the bill does to foster the promotion of free speech, I think, is very important. The main thing that I would urge is that the status quo position of leave it as it is not acceptable. Universities will not survive. It's a kind of complacency that I hear. They certainly won't survive, and the academic standards that have just been referred to will deteriorate as well. There's a tendency to blame students when we look at what's changed recently. Either they're disparagingly written off as Generation Snowflake, or more positively, they're posed as uniquely sensitive to the issues of oppressed identity groups, unlike previous generations who've never understood suffering, and they have a unique insight into it. And there's a combination of both of those things being true. But I don't want to blame students, although it is true that whenever I go and talk at universities on free speech, many of them do talk about free speech as though it's a value from ye olden days, very much a kind of like, well, we respect your right to think that free speech is important, but we've got other priorities, does get said. But I often find that a commitment to free speech on and off campus is under strain, not amongst the young, but actually amongst the grown-ups, as it were. At best, there can be a really shallow, instrumental lip service paid to the value of free speech with so many ifs and buts and caveats that it's barely there. It's hardly a compelling case being made for the positive virtues of free speech, but rather kind of grudging acceptance that free speech is important, yes, but then there's always, this is accompanied by an emphasis on how free speech can play a corrosive and dangerous role in society, can lead to a toxic political culture, can lead to hate crimes, and now we've just heard in this debate, can mean that there's going to be all these charlatan quack scientists going in dragging out educational standards. And actually, in this bill, even the emphasis that the bill wants to place on everyone else on free speech within the law as a qualifier does feel a bit tepid, especially when governments of all stripes have regularly infringed on free speech through legislation. And as we speak, we have a government that's proposing a pro-free speech bill at the same time as the online safety bill and the public order bills, which are hardly wildly pro-free speech pieces of legislation. But also on campus, we've seen lots of the academics, rather than the students, I think, introducing things which have undermined a culture of academic freedom. And so I just, you know, whether it's mandated courses in microaggressions or unconscious bias, people feel as though they're walking on eggshells. So I just wanted to kind of say that it's very important that we use this legislation, and that's why I like Amendment 31, to make a positive case for the inviolable moral good of free speech. It was interesting because there was a lot of newspaper coverage about the seminar in Cambridge where students were, it was described in the newspapers as training them in free speech. One of my colleagues actually ran that, Alistair Donald from Living Freedom, and it had Andrew Doyle, the author of New Puritans, speaking and on Milton, and Dr. Piers Benn on Locke. And the thing that was really fascinating was that the students who attended last night, the reports said things like, I thought that this is what coming to Cambridge would be like, but it hasn't been like this until tonight. They also said that they often feel constrained in what they can say at universities by their own tutors, tut-tutting if they say the wrong thing. When I brought out my book, I Find That Offensive, in 2016, I was warned that, I was told it was exaggerated. Of course, it ended up being a complete underestimation of the problem. I was warned that young people would hate it and that I would be shunned by the young because it was addressing Generation Snowflake and the culture of safetyism. The truth is, when it was published, the people who hated it were the educational establishment, and it got terrible reviews in all educational press. People who really liked it were students, and I spent 2 years doing a kind of tour of all universities speaking on it. And what the students said was, phew, it's a relief to have somebody talking about this. I'd never heard arguments like this put before. I'd never really understood the history or philosophy of free speech. It wasn't, by the way, that they all loved me or they all agreed with me. They just were glad that somebody was prepared to have the open discussion and debate. And I think that we've got to use this piece of legislation to promote free speech and academic freedom as much as we can. So I support Amendment 31.
I hesitate to intervene in this debate because I'm not an academic.